To Historical Horror and the History of Halloween, brought to you by Adjunct Professor David Adkins. Yay. There are several students in the audience that I know have been in Mr. Adkins' classes. There may be some in the audience that are still in Mr. Adkins' classes. We also have students here from all different classes, and we have many other people that are not our students, and thank you very much for coming here and being supportive of this night of historical horror and history of Halloween. I'm only going to tell you a very short little teeny weeny bit about Mr. Adkins. I've already told you he's an adjunct professor for us here at Roane State for history. Also, he has an interest in some things that are fairly interesting. One time in my class, he came in unexpectedly to the students into my class, and he took part in a debate on Marvel versus DC.
Yes.
Yeah, oh, look at that. Yeah, people know that. Which one would you vote for? Marvel. Oh, okay. Who's DC? Woo! Now, there you go. Batman. It's all about Batman. He's also knowledgeable in sci-fi. He's also getting very interested in folklore and is starting doing some research on his own about folklore and see where that goes. So we look forward to hearing more from Mr. Adkins, and that is your short introduction. Ta-da.
All right, well, I get my tablet started. Let's get some clerical stuff out of the way. Most of you have noticed, but I've got to say it, we've got sign-in sheets over there for like every professor at Roane State. So look for the one you've got. If you want your extra credit, make sure you sign in before you leave. Very good? All right. I also want to reiterate, thank you all for showing up on this appropriately gloomy and slightly damp evening. We're here to talk about scary stuff, sort of. To start with the history of Halloween, I want to present the idea that Halloween, for me, is possibly the most American holiday. I know some of you are thinking 4th of July, etc., but let me make my case, and we'll go with it, all right? Let's start from the beginning. Let's start with the Celts. Originally, we believe the origins of Halloween come from a ritual time called Samhain for the Celts. Yes, I know it looks like it's pronounced Samhain, but it's not. It's Samhain because the alphabet is kind of optional. It's just a suggestion for the Celts. So, it was a Celtic festival held October 31st to the 1st of November. Maybe. We don't know for sure because they didn't have the same calendars we do. In fact, they didn't have calendars at all. But those dates coincide roughly with the autumn equinox, that moment where the day and the night are equal. And it's also the moment, incredibly important for the Celts, where they have to harvest their crops or, everybody starves. Bang. For the Celts, it signaled the end of the year and the beginning of winter, the death of the year. It's also the night where, supposedly, the veil between the worlds was the thinnest, where creatures like the Sidhe, we would call them elves, but not like Keebler elves, don't think that. These things were capricious, mean, possibly vicious, and easily offended. So, a tradition arose where if a traveler came to your door during this time, you could not turn them away. You would automatically let them in, set a place at the table because you didn't know for sure whether it was just a person, a traveling vagrant, or an ancient god that might have stopped by your house for dinner. It would be bad to offend something like that, so these traditions came about. And, of course, people being people, many took advantage of this. We also think this may have been the Celtic New Year because the Celts believed in a cycle of life. And for them, the whole system started with death, reverse of what we usually do. People die, then they get reborn. You gotta die first before that happens, so that's just the way their system worked. But clearly, this isn't Halloween, right? But there are traditions we share in common with them. For example, jack-o'-lanterns, right? Now, the tradition of carving vegetables into horrible faces originates kind of with the Celts as well, because ghosts, goblins, and other things floating around during this time of year, you want to keep them away from your house, so you carve vegetables into horrible faces to drive them away. However, they didn't use pumpkins. Their choice of vegetable was, well, that. Yeah, that's the reaction I usually get when I show this. And this is a turnip. It's been suggested that one Halloween we may do a turnip carving contest. I don't know. We'll see if we can get something worse looking than that. But the tradition of jack-o'-lanterns and turnips has so many variations on the legends. I'm just going to give you my favorite. It involves a gentleman named Stingy Jack. And according to all accounts, horrible human being, hence the nickname, and his appointed time came and Satan showed up to collect his soul. Jack, being Jack, convinced Satan somehow that stopping off for a drink before going to hell was the best thing to do. But Jack convinced Satan that, well, I don't have any money. And even the devil doesn't want to offend an innkeeper. So the devil turned himself into a coin to pay for the drinks, which Jack immediately swiped, stuck in his pocket next to a crucifix, meaning the devil couldn't turn back into his normal form. Holding the devil hostage, he gained a concession from him. He could never go to hell, and the devil would leave him be for the rest of his life. Fair enough, right? Free from all moral constraints, Jack becomes a menace to polite society for the next while until his appointed time shows up. When he dies peacefully, because he's been left alone, he approaches the pearly gates confident that, well, I can't go to hell, so there's only one other place. But when he gets there, they say, well, we can't let you in. With nowhere else to go, he returns to the underworld and talks to Satan once again, but the devil honors his deal and tells Jack that I can't take you in. You made me a promise. But he gives Jack a gift. In his wandering in the eternal darkness that he now sees before him in eternity, the devil gives him a turnip with a small coal from hell in it to light his way in the darkness. Now there's only one time of year that Jack can wander the world. Care to guess?
Halloween.
Looking for more souls to join him and ease his loneliness. Right? So that's one. There are literally 100 variations on that same story. But explains the name at the very least. Another tradition, I'm betting many of you have participated in, bonfires, right? Anybody? Standard for this time of year? Why? As the nights get longer, the Celtic people used bonfires not only as a comfort, but as the autumn equinox approached and the nights got longer and longer. This is a last great rage, a reminder that the light isn't going to disappear, that it's just temporarily. I think many of us do it because, well, it's getting cold. But, yeah. Once again, though, these traditions aside, this is still not Halloween yet. Right? For that, we have to jump forward several hundred years to the Romans. One of the strengths of Roman society, one of the reasons they're so successful, is as they move through and conquer other cultures, they take traditions from them and adopt them for their own, and they take their own traditions and insert them into these other cultures. And one of the biggest things the Romans bring to the Celtic regions are fruit trees from the Mediterranean. To that end, they also bring the ritual of Pomona, goddess of fruits and vegetables in the harvest, who, coincidentally, her rituals are celebrated at this same time of year. I'm willing to guess that unknowingly, many of you have participated at one point in your life in the ritual of worship of Pomona. Anybody know what I'm talking about?
No, you're correct.
You are correct. Thought it was just a game, right? Still, we're not there. For that, we jump forward several hundred more years. Christianity takes an idea from the Romans. They adapt to the structure of cultures they are. They infiltrate. Wrong word, but nonetheless. As Christianity spreads, they adopt the same holidays. Right? If anybody's interested, I can ruin Christmas and Easter for you too, but that's another lecture. And it becomes official in the 7th century. Pope Gregory declares All Saints' Day, November 1st. October 31st was All Hallows' Eve, and November 2nd was All Souls' Day. These are days to remember the sacrifices of saints and martyrs from Christianity, and a day to remember your loved ones that you've lost during the year fondly. Jump forward even further to the 16th century. You're seeing Christian children adopt the idea of dressing up to hide themselves from ghosts and goblins. But since Christians don't believe in those, they are instead dressing up in horrible, grisly costumes to commemorate the horrible deaths of various martyrs and saints. But the tradition continues here. For some reason, this sticks. Partly because it's harvest time, and harvest time is harvest time. But what about you, America? Here, we jump forward even further. In the 1800s, America, many of you may know, is flooded with immigrants, particularly from Ireland in the wake of the Irish potato famine. These immigrant communities bring their traditions with them. Changed and altered though they are, they do bring them. And they settle into various ethnic neighborhoods like Hell's Kitchen in New York and other places like that. East Tennessee, as many of you know, is predominantly Scots-Irish. They bring these with them. And as they settle into these mixed neighborhoods, and on October 31st, Irish children go out, dress up, and get free candy and food, the neighborhood kids go, "What are you all doing?" And they say, "Well, I'm going to get in on that." And it spread from there. Why wouldn't it, right? The idea of guising, dressing up, disguising yourself becomes more popular, as does the practice of souling. Although that one is a little fuzzy, really. Rich folks, according to some accounts, have a harder time getting into heaven. So the tradition of souling is where children show up at your door and sing prayers of faith and forgiveness to try to save your soul if you're a rich person. In exchange for their efforts, rich folks come out and give them baked goods and hot beverages. Clearly, this has moved from harvest time to Christmas for us, for Carol, right? Yeah, I get that reaction too. Anyway, trick or treat. We're finally getting turn of the century postcards, like this one, show children dressed up in various ways, but nowhere is the term trick or treat mentioned until 1927. But it doesn't take off. It doesn't lock in until the 1930s. Anybody want to guess why it becomes popular in the 1930s? It is. It is a way for children to go out and get charity for free, without asking for it, without the embarrassment of seeking charity, right? And the children get things that they would not be able to have access to for the rest of the year. It's pretty good, right? Culture and structure influence these holidays far more than many people give them credit for. But originally, costumes looked like this. Monsters, creatures of ghosts and legend. But the most popular films in the 1930s were horror films. Dracula, Frankenstein. Why? Tough times, people do gravitate towards horror films. Don't worry, I'll get to that. But since they're so scary, children adopt those costumes very quickly. Then American pop culture arrives on the scene, blending and mutating it even further from what it was. Now it's more us. Today, well, Halloween is a secular holiday. It doesn't have anything to do with religion, officially, depending on your personal choices, but it's celebrated throughout the United States in one form or another. Other countries do celebrate it, but not the way we do. We're kind of unique, and we spend roughly $10 to $11 billion a year on Halloween. $3 to $4 billion in candy alone. Right? It is the second most expensive holiday. I don't even have to tell you it's Christmas for the first one or somebody else. But there you go, right? An average of 50 million trick-or-treaters between the ages of 5 and 14 will participate, not counting even smaller ones that their parents take out for no reason whatsoever. Kidding. And 70,000 acres of pumpkins are harvested just for Halloween. That's not even close. Thanksgiving, the next closest, not even in the same neighborhood. This holiday, for me, told you I'd make my case, is more us than any other. Yes, Independence Day, America, founding of the country, that is truly important. But many nations have their own version of Independence Day, and they celebrate it, believe it or not, roughly the same way we do. But this is the Celts, and the Romans, and the Christians, and immigration, and economics, and community. This is us. We've taken all those elements and turned them into something mixed with pop culture and wrapped with a giant bow of capitalism and turned it into our holiday, regardless of where it started. And even now, it's changing. It's altering again. You all are familiar, I hope, with Day of the Dead, and if you're not, holiday that arises in Mexico mostly, however. It has its roots with traditions with the Aztecs and other pre-Columbian cultures. The holiday's purpose is to celebrate the people you've lost in the previous year. Not to mourn them, but to celebrate them as if they were still alive with you. It's a really great holiday because of the high levels of immigration we've had over the past several decades. Many people are now seeing Halloween as a 2 or 3 day holiday rather than just October 31st. Right? So there you have it. Free to argue with me. Welcome it, as a matter of fact. Anybody that knows me will tell you that. But there's a lot more detail to go in here, but we have a limited amount of time. I will present some questions, but then I will get to what some of you are here for, the creepy stuff. Anybody have any quick questions on this?
October 31st is also a cross quarter day.
Yep.
We're talking about the halfway between the solstice and the
Anybody else? Y'all bailing out? Running into the creepy stuff? I'm just messing with y'all. It's all good. Yes.
How
I knew you'd ask the question. Sorry.
comparing it to like from us to other countries, how big do other countries celebrate Halloween?
If you're talking economics, a quarter of what we spend. Right? And it's in regions. There are various Halloween-like traditions that other countries have. Ireland still does the kind of closer to traditional, but because Ireland is so heavily Catholic, those are not overly promoted. Right? So, yeah, nobody does it to our level, especially economical. Right? Talk to people from France and try to explain Halloween the way we do it. You mean you just show up and people give you candy? They're like, what? Yeah. So. Yes.
So, how do you feel about trunk or treat?
Not a fan.
The question?
Yes. Oh, sorry. He asked how I felt about trunk or treat. Not a fan. I am a child of the Midwest. I was born in Ohio. Halloween's a much bigger deal up north, but I took my wife up there last weekend to prove it. Because, frankly, in Ohio and above, it's the last time you're getting outdoors for like 4 or 5 months as it snows you in, so, so it's the last big party of the year. So, and I grew up in a kind of Leave It to Beaver neighborhood, so I had a root. And that experience stuck with me, and I'm always disappointed every year that Oak Ridge isn't more trick-or-treat friendly. We always get a few, but. Anybody else got a quick one before I move on? Yes.
Why candy? Why not like hams or pencils?
Well, ham goes bad. And pencils. I've gotten those. I was really angry as a child about getting a pencil, right? I was telling my wife, I got somebody when I was like 12 gave me walnuts. I mean, what monster does that? Yeah, that too. Those are acceptable.
Yeah.
But walnuts? That's the equivalent of Charlie Brown, you know, I got a rock. So, yeah. All right. Yeah, oh, yeah.
Just a statement. All I'm saying is that the person who gives out pencils on Halloween is the person who wakes up with toilet paper on their house.
Yes. It's true. People always focus on the treat part. But it is the first half, which is a blatant threat. Just to be clear,
I
right?
think it's gonna be great discussion because I feel like if you're picky, like you can't be picky.
Look at what we're doing now compared to that, right? The commercial candy we have now, they have most of that back in the day. So it was different. It was different. Baked goods, a lot of other things. Popcorn balls were a big comment. That was before everybody got afraid of poison candy, but that's another story. All right, speaking of horror stories. Yeah.
Because the ancient Celts have released in regard to Samhain, they measured their days beginning at nightfall.
Correct.
So Halloween and that tradition actually goes from the evening of October 31st to the sunset on November 1st.
That is correct. Now, yeah, there are a lot of details I've left out. And to be honest, if I could, I would do a semester-long class on this. But I can't. I had to struggle to get my other one in, so we'll just stick with that. Okay, you ready for some awful people?
Yeah.
All right, let's do this in chronological order. Some of my students have had me before for some of these, but I've added some new ones. Let's talk about this young lady first. Her name, clearly, is LOCUSTA of Gaul. 1st century, Rome, 80, by the way. Agrippina, the wife of Emperor Claudius, wanted her husband dead. And to accomplish this, she turned to LOCUSTA of Gaul, who had a reputation as a skilled herbalist and poisoner. LOCUSTA was reported to be so skilled that you could name the time someone would die after they were poisoned, and it would happen. When Claudius was finally out of the way, his son Nero becomes the emperor, and LOCUSTA becomes a favorite. Nero eliminates many of his political rivals with her, and in gratitude, awards her with a school so she can teach other poisoners how to do that job, while she tested her concoctions on thousands of unwilling slaves. She is possibly considered one of the first serial killers. By that same, unfortunately for her, it all came to an end when Nero lost power and committed suicide. Not by poison. Just to be clear. She was immediately accosted by the troops of the new emperor and sentenced to be torn apart. And her school was burned to the ground. Good warm-up. Let's try somebody a little more visceral.
Oh.
Gilderay. Almost all of you, at least in part, know the story of Joan of Arc. Right? Saint of Orleans. But what you may not know is throughout her entire campaign, Gilderay, the towering 6'4" knight, was her self-appointed bodyguard. After she was sentenced to death, he returned to his country estate, his castle, really, and to live a quiet life, and then basically settled into isolation. But his relatives, mainly after his money, got tired of him ignoring him, so they sent representatives of the church to his castle to confront him. He kept turning them away until one really insistent bishop forced his way into the castle and killed him. This necessitated a bunch of church troops who stormed his castle, cracked it open, and found the truth about his isolation. He was luring children from the nearby villages into his castle. He would feed them, clothe them, and treat them like princes and princesses. Then, in the middle of the night, he would wake them up and hunt them through his estate. At first, strangling them to death, later getting more and more vicious, and then, according to the church testimony, desecrating their bodies in, quote, unspeakable ways. He, according to reports, painted one room of his castle completely with the blood of his victims, and used their severed limbs as decoration in his satanic rituals, which he confessed to be clear. Although confessions under the Inquisition, well, when asked how many children he had killed, he said, "I'm not sure, they all blend together after a while," which he might have meant literally. Just saying, those of you who wanted jokes, there you go. But in the end, he was convicted of murder, blasphemy, and Satanism. He was burned at the stake. And unlike Joan, he deserved it. Alright. Okay, this next picture gets more disturbing the longer you look at it. This is SAWNEY Bean. Yeah,
Okay, well, I'm done back here.
SAWNEY Bean's father was a ditch digger. His father expected his son to enter the workforce along with him, but the problem was SAWNEY felt he was unsuited for work of that nature, or work of any nature, to be honest. Instead, he fled home with a woman named Black Agnes Douglas, who had been reported to be a witch. They made their living robbing people along the road until, along the coast of Scotland, they found a cave. The entrance was hidden when it was high tide, so they took up residence there. They remained there, undisturbed and undiscovered for 25 years. During that time, they produced 6 daughters, 8 sons, 14 granddaughters, and 18 grandsons. You all want to do the mental calculation on that. They never went to town. Yeah. How do you support a family like that? Well, they did so by robbing passers-by on the coast road, attacking them in the dark, beating them up, killing them, and then dragging them back to their cave where they would be dismembered and their limbs would be pickled for later.
Pleasant people.
Indeed. The local townsfolk weren't ignorant of the fact that these people were disappearing all the time. In fact, they sent out search parties. One group even saw the cave, but did not explore it because they said it was unfit or impossible for humans to habitate there. They did, by the way, catch the local innkeeper who they blamed for it and hung. Wasn't his fault. This all came to an end when there was a big county fair. A soldier and his newlywed wife were heading along a coast road on the way home when they were accosted by the clan. This time, though, the soldier was experienced and armed, and he held them off. But their horse was startled, his new wife fell, and was mauled to death by the being grandchildren. That is the exact quote from the newspaper article, mauled to death. He survived, and a large crowd moving up the road from the fair drove the clan off. The injured soldier was taken to the magistrate, and immediate search was found. Since it was so fresh this time, they found the trail and went back to the cave. What they found was the inspiration for hundreds of horror movies. Piles of heirlooms and loot that would never be spent was scattered throughout the 200-foot deep cave, along with hanging limbs and barrels of pickled body parts. The Bean Clan, according to accounts, gave in without a fight. Now, there are a couple accounts of what happens to them here. The most popular is that they were taken to Glasgow and convicted without a trial because, upon observation, the judges felt they were, quote, subhuman and did not deserve a trial. The men were executed by having their hands and feet cut off where they bled to death, and the women were burned alive. Justice in the 15th century.
You know what, I feel like this is one of those times you have to give the judges credit for calling someone subhuman.
Yeah.
No comment, just saying. Y'all showed up. You know what you signed up for. All right, let's try something else. Let's try something a little shorter, but interesting nonetheless. Thug Baron. Yes, that's his name. Why? Because he was the head of the Thuggee cult, the worshippers of Kali in India. The word thug is actually taken from the activities of these groups throughout India. He is possibly the world's most prolific serial killer. He and his 200 followers would carry a yellow sash But in that, they'd have a coin sewn into it, and they would use it to strangle people to death. They would infiltrate traveler and trade caravans, strangling people in the dark. This was destroying trade, so of course the British Empire was interested in that. They hunted him for 2 decades before he was finally caught. Now, one of his friends ratted on him. So, when he was caught, he was arrested at the age of 79. He claimed that he had performed his first murder at the age of 10, and he had been present during 931 murders, and that he had personally strangled over 163 people. The reason I give this credence is the British Empire immediately said that didn't happen and covered it all up and executed him privately. And never mentioned they caught him until much later. Most prolific serial killer in history. Some of you that were in my class this morning, we talked about World War I. And that's what's next. Because we can't do something without war. We've got to talk about an incident called the Charge of the Dead Men. 1915, in April of 1915, a group of German soldiers are trying to take a castle on the border of Poland. It's called Auschwitz Castle. Not Auschwitz, different story, not one for tonight either. But Auschwitz Castle is a medieval castle on the border of Poland and Russia, basically where the Ukraine is. The Germans had been trying to take it from April till August, until they finally made the decision to shell the medieval castle with chlorine and bromine poison gas. You don't know, chlorine gas, when mixed with aerosolized water, becomes hydrochloric acid. And before your lungs fill up. Right? Now, this is a medieval castle. It has no ventilation, and Russian gas masks, you would actually be better off putting a wet paper bag over your head. They shelled it starting in the morning for 6 hours. A company of German soldiers arrived at the gate and opened it up. But I must set the scene for you. As they open the gate, the entire courtyard is covered with fire and smoke. They can barely see in front of them, but then, out of the smoke, rise 100 Russian soldiers. They are a horrific sight. Their skin is falling off of them. Their eyes are melting out of their heads. Some of them are literally coughing their lungs up onto their chests, but they're so angry that the Germans gassed them, they refuse to die. And they charge the company of German soldiers at the gate. And they immediately, faced with a real army of zombies, throw down their weapons and flee. All of these men did pass away, but it did take the Germans another 3 months to take the fortress, because they refused to go near it. What's Halloween without a zombie story? Just saying. All right, let's try something creepy. Like I haven't yet, right? This is a creepy on a different level. We need to talk about the HINTERKAIFEC murders. In April of 1922. To tell this story, though, we've got to back up to October of 1921. In Bavaria, Andreas Gruber noticed footprints in the snow leading to his house. He mentioned it to a neighbor. He looked around, but he didn't think anything of it and just kind of forgot about the incident. This is arguably the biggest mistake in his life. Possibly the last one. Over the next several months, the family had several strange occurrences, missing sets of house keys, newspapers showing up that they didn't order, and their maid quit because she said their house was haunted. She heard footsteps above her head and felt like she was being watched all the time. This continued, and perhaps they should have listened to their maid. But they blew it off. She's superstitious. Doesn't matter. And the Gruber family had a reputation for being isolation. They kept to themselves, but when their 7-year-old son didn't show up for school in April, people began to get worried. But there was smoke rising from their chimney. Somebody was clearly home, so it was okay. The animals were out there. Everything was fine. Then they didn't show up for church a couple weeks in a row. Finally, some neighbors decided to go see what was going on. They found the entire family. Andres, his wife, their adult daughter, their new maid, and 2 children, ages 7 and 2, all hacked to pieces with a pickaxe. As the investigation increased, they found that whoever killed them had just settled down and made dinner, had fed the animals, had watched over them, had kept the fire going, had lived there amongst the bodies scattered throughout the house and the barn, and further investigation showed somebody had been living in their attic, unbeknownst to them, for at least 6 months. Whoever it was, before the neighbors got around to checking on them, had simply walked away. And now, 100 years later, still unsolved. Y'all gonna go home and check your attic? After I told my wife this story, she made me start checking the attic. All right, 2 more stories. Dyatlov Pass, named after Igor Dyatlov. Shocking, right? In January of 1959, 10 Soviet students engaged in a hike to reach the top of Orton Mountain in the Ural Mountains in the Soviet Union. One of their number decided at the last minute to drop out, but the remaining hikers were all experienced, well-equipped, and thoroughly prepared for a very difficult journey. After checking in with their sports club, giving them a schedule for their return, they set out, but, as we already can guess, they did not return. An immediate search was made, and at this point, the whole thing takes a really bizarre turn. And if you can figure it out, somebody would appreciate something, they would appreciate it. They found the hikers' tents easily, but the tents had been sliced open from the inside. And the hikers had fled through the snow, but had left their shoes. Following the footprints in the snow, they found the first bodies almost a mile from the camp. 2 of them were under a giant cedar tree, settled around the remnants of a very tiny fire. Yuri Kirchenko and Doroshenko were both found shoeless and in their underwear. 3 more bodies, all undressed, were found between the camp and the first 2. There were signs of damage to their hands and evidence that they had tried to climb the cedar tree. And Slobodan had significant head trauma, consistent with repeated blows to his head from a great height. The remaining hikers were found 2 months later when the snow finally began to melt. They were even more strange. They were 75 yards further into the trees in a small ravine. Nikolai's skull had been smashed. Camilla Simeon both had massive damage to their rib cage consistent with a high-speed car crash.
Wow.
Zenyatta was missing her tongue, her eyes, part of her lips, facial tissue, and a fragment of her skull bone was missing. The body of Alexander was found a distance from the others, no sign of any trauma whatsoever. And it was clear that they died at separate times because as they died, the survivors had tried to scavenge the clothes from their dead friends. Even weirder, many of those items of clothing showed evidence of radiation. Since they couldn't figure it out, in true Soviet fashion, they closed the investigation almost immediately. They did reopen it in 2019, but a little late for fresh evidence. One of the weirdest unsolved disappearances ever in world history. So, like I said, if any of you, and there are plenty of theories, from aliens to Cold War experiments to... No, they haven't actually thrown that one out there, because that's not a popular one in the Soviet Union, believe it or not. All right, this one's a little lighter. That's the last one. We'll open up for questions. We've got to talk about Elmer McCurdy, 1880 to 1911. But you might have noticed there's some extra dates there. Elmer, he had a rough life. He was raised by a single mother, and he taught employment when he was young with the mines. And he learned how to handle, sort of, nitroglycerin, which he took that experience and immediately turned to a life of crime. But like the rest of his life, he fell short there as well. Several botched bank robberies, and he's even got the record for the lowest netted train robbery in history, where he failed to blow the safe on the train and got $43 in the conductor's watch. He was caught in Oklahoma, but caught is a loose word. They knew he was in a small house, so they shot through it and killed him. That's it. For most people, the story would end there. But not for Elmer. Elmer goes to the undertaker, but nobody's there to pay for his funeral, so the undertaker won't bury him. Not until somebody pays for it, and nobody does. So, taking inspiration from some of the Wild West shows he'd seen, he puts Elmer on display. 5 cents a look. And Elmer makes more money as a corpse than he ever did when he was alive. This goes on for a while and it becomes a little famous. He labels him as the outlaw that wouldn't give up. Because he didn't get a chance to give up, they just shot him. But beside the point. Soon, 2 men from California show up and claim to be Elmer's long-lost brother. The undertaker has no choice but to turn the body over him, but they were not his brother. They were the owners of the Patterson Traveling Carnival, who had heard about the money-making scheme and took Elmer on tour, which he continued to do until 1922. The carnival was sold, and Elmer was sold along with it, and he was added to a traveling, quote, museum of crime, alongside several wax figures and replicas of Old West villains. This kept on until 1935. 33, sorry. Dyslexia is bad there. Elmer was sold again, this time to promote a movie called Narcotic, all capitals. And Elmer's body was put on display in theater lobbies to show the consequences of turning to drugs. By this point, Elmer's mummified, and the film promoter said, well, he looks like that because he did heroin. In 1949, people that had owned Elmer passed away, and he was placed in storage with the rest of the props. But in 1964, the son of that person loaned Elmer to another filmmaker, and he makes a brief appearance in the 1967 movie She Freak. If none of you have seen it, don't. Just say. Anyway, I watch these things so you don't have to. But he was then sold to the Hollywood Wax Museum, taken on tour again, and displayed at Mount Rushmore. But at Mount Rushmore, wind damage made him lose several toes, some fingers, and an ear. And he was returned to California, where his owner said that he was no longer lifelike enough to put on display. End quote. So he was sold to an amusement park in Long Beach, California, and placed in their haunted house on the gallows, which he had managed to miss when he was alive. And he stayed there until 1976. Some will believe. Middle-aged people here will know they were filming an episode of The $6 Million Man. And they were using that location when a cameraman bumped into the prop and Elmer's arm fell off. And he saw real bone and he called the cops. It took 9 months for the police to put all this together and figure out who Elmer was and where he'd come from. And when they did, finally, in 1977, he was returned and interred at Boot Hill in Guthrie, Oklahoma. And just to make sure, they encased his casket in 2 feet of concrete. Just to make sure he stayed put. Elmer, after his death, made more money, traveled further, and was far more successful than he ever was in his relatively short life. Well, that was actually Ripley's Believe It or Not story in the old TV show, believe it or not. But yeah, Elmer's, that whole urban legend about real corpses being in haunted houses, true. Just once, but all right. Yes.
Is there a crime higher in this tier than gross abuse of a corpse? I feel like we've crossed the line of gross abuse of a corpse here.
I don't know if Elmer would have minded, to be honest. Right? He didn't really see any of it, though. So anyway. These stories and others like them, well, Halloween. They're us. We like, well, a lot of us, like being frightened. We like the adrenaline rush. We like the feeling. The collection of horror films that we see regularly in the theaters is evidence of this. And the amount of money they make compared to what they cost mean we'll see an endless parade of it. Now, I do have an offer for you. Normally, when I do this for my classes, I give the option of extra credit if you can name everybody on this. I've got small door prizes if anybody wants to come up after we're done and take a shot at it. So, at this point, I'll leave it open to questions. I will stick around as long as you all want me to. I don't have a life already. So, she left. She's out there, so I'm safe. See, that's really scary to say that. But anyway, what questions y'all have? What do you want to talk about? Yes? I saw you first.
She was a girl in the French Quarter everywhere. Her name was Delphine Wallery.
They featured her in a season, a couple of years ago in a season of American Horror Story. Yeah, that's all true. She shows up in some of my other Halloween. She's a little different. She's hard to classify as a serial killer. She is a sadistic, narcissistic sociopath. Delphine Lalaurie in the French Quarter, about 1830. Yes. Sorry. Working my way across.
I meant to ask you this in class, but have you ever heard about the girl that got like married or hung in her wedding dress in Charleston?
Yes.
Okay.
But that's actually a very common urban legend. There are variations on it. Even the Celts had a version of that with the banshee. Sad, destitute woman committed suicide. You can see it again in Mexico. The white woman down in Nashville. There's a lot of those. In fact, there's a legend like that in almost every state.
So it's not true?
I don't know for sure, but it's entirely possible it is, but it's a super common trope. Yes. Yes, I did. I left her out because a lot of people just know her. I wanted to do some less known. He asked about Elizabeth Bathory. I left her out because she's a pretty common Halloween story historically. Although there's a lot of inconsistencies in the story. Yeah, but no one will ever know, right? There's no census back then. Nobody had Social Security numbers. Saw somebody else's hand up there. Yes.
So, like, when did clowns start becoming scary? I hate the It movies. That's
I actually blame John Wayne Gacy, serial killer in the 1970s. Yeah, he dressed as a clown. The images of him. Yeah, people had fear of clowns before that, but they were pretty common on TV before John Wayne Gacy, and then they're very rare on TV after him. So, is that the only cause? No, but Stephen King admitted to partially thinking about Gacy when he was writing It. Anybody else? I see many of you are calculating the poster.
Trying to get them all.
Yes.
Did you hear that recently they might have found out who the Zodiac Killer was?
Yeah, there's been several shots of the attempts at that, and a few on Jack the Ripper. Every few years, usually around October for some reason, people start throwing out theories about unsolved serial killers quite a bit. In fact, the HINTERKAIFEC murders are eerily similar to the Truman Capote book in Cold Blood. Have any of you read that? And there's the idea that that killer was the same one. Maybe, but there's no proof. He never admitted to it. They caught him, but they never admitted. He never admitted. Yes.
What is, in your opinion, the scariest horror movie?
Oh crap. I am weird. And clearly, right? I have no. I don't have a startle reflex. So when people jump out at me, I just like. So
for normal people, what is
for normal people, it depends, and that's like asking me my favorite horror movie. You'd have to. Fear is so subjective, right? Well, clowns, right? Some people are afraid of clowns. I think they're just dumb. But
with the original Aliens, all is good.
Well, that story, that's a haunted house story in space. When Ridley Scott suggested Alien, he said the reason he wrote it, he said that the problem with haunted house stories is, why don't you just leave? So he made a haunted house you couldn't leave. That's where he put it in space.